Animal. And my favorite animal today is going to be pretty cool. I don't have a live one to look at, but we have lots of different shells. So it's going to be kind of exciting to talk about this. Let's talk a little bit about some things that are upcoming. Again, I will be traveling to another park sometime this week, probably Friday afternoon. We have a really special program on Friday morning, our 11 o'clock program. I'm going to be visiting our blue jays. Hopefully they cooperate. These are wild animals that we're dealing with, so sometimes they're going to be friendly, sometimes they're going to dance in front of the camera and do some cool things, and sometimes they're just going to hop around and you're barely going to see them flashing through the camera. So I'm very excited to see what happens with our blue jays. That's again on Friday at 11. Friday at 2, I think we're going to be visiting Fort Griswold State Park, one of my favorite places ever since I was a little kid. So we're going to learn about a battle that happened at Fort Griswold. That's in Groton, so really exciting to go there. We have programs, other programs throughout the week. We're going to be talking about more animals and different things, so lots of things to do. You can also begin our great backyard pursuit. That you can get the link to that on our website, megspointnaturecenter.org. That's a Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection program that instead of doing the Great Park Pursuit, we're doing the Great Backyard Pursuit. So you get lots of activities that you get to do in your backyard. Also, we have connections to the Kellogg Environmental Center, Dinosaur State Park, and the Goodwin Conservation Center. And you can learn lots of things from all of those different programs. We each have a little bit of a different program, so lots of great information on all of those sites. And again, you can link to those through the megspointnaturecenter.org website. All right, you ready to talk about this animal? Today's animal is the bay scallop. Now, bay scallops are not common in Connecticut, and if you look in the old books, they don't even say that they're found in Long Island Sound. The bay scallop is a bit smaller than the sea scallop. So you get larger sea scallops. The biggest scallops, I think they say they get up to like 10 inches across. So that's a big scallop. Our scallops don't get that big. Only about 3 inches is the biggest that our scallops are going to get. So if we take a look at some shells, this is a pretty good size when they might get a little bit larger than this. Now, scallops don't live very long. 1.5 to 2 years tops for our bay scallops. All right. The larger scallops, the older ones, can get to be 20 years old. So a bit older, a bit longer lived than the ones that we have, the bay scallops that are here in Long Island Sound. Okay, now there are 400 species of scallops around the world. And if we want to use the scallop for our social distancing, we have to keep 24 of these between you and someone else. So that's 24 will fit into 6 feet. All right? So lots of scallops between you and anyone else that you encounter. Now I'm going to encourage everyone to continue to post where you're from. And if you have any questions, feel free to put your questions up as well, and I'll try and answer them as we go. So bay scallops come in lots of different colors. I'm going to show shells through the whole thing, and they're all going to be different. You're not going to see 2 shells that are identical. If you find an intact scallop, which I don't have any intact ones, their color pattern will be much more similar. So look at how bright that one is and how dark this one is. So they do come lots of different colors. And I already mentioned, they only live 1.5 years. Some of them will make it to 2 years. Now, here's something really interesting about these. One of the most fascinating things. This is a functional hermaphrodite. Now, that's a really big word, but what that means is that the girl parts and the boy parts are both in the same animal. All right? So, that's how they reproduce. They can both produce the babies, or one shell can produce babies. Now, the babies are released into the water, and eventually they will settle down. Okay, so they will settle down to the bottom, and that's actually called settlement. So once they settle, only about 10 to 15% of these or 10 to 15% are not going to make it to adults. Okay, so we could only have half of the eggs or the spat baby. All right, here's a cool word, spat. The baby scallops are called spat. Craziest words for these things. All right, so only 50% at the least will survive. You could get 90%, but usually it's somewhere in between there. So lots of them as babies are going to get eaten. Now, we've talked about food chains a lot in the past. I haven't used the word food chain, but when one thing eats another, that's a food chain. There are lots of things that like to eat spat, that like to eat baby scallops. People like to eat scallops, but people usually eat the larger scallops. So a nice big one like this, that's what a person is going to be eating. Here, let's take a look at another color. So the colors range from different types of gray, reds, browns, and mottled, any combination in between. Some of them have more defined stripes, some of them more speckled. So lots of really cool colors you can get from a scallop. Now, where they live, typically those baby spat are going to settle into seagrass beds. In Long Island Sound, we've got eelgrass beds. And those are just grasses that are found out in the Sound. They settle down there, and that's where they're going to begin their lives. Now, these are filter feeders. And we've mentioned filter feeders in the past. You can look at all of our past programs on megspointnaturecenter.org or the Megs Point Nature Center YouTube page. So if you want to see programs we've done in the past, a lot of the bivalves are filter feeders. These are also filter feeders. They're mostly filtering out plankton in the water, and that's what the babies are going to eat. Here, let me pick another color here. That one's really similar. So we talked, here's a little bit more of the reddish color. I think it's focusing on me, not on the shell. So how's that? Hopefully you guys can see that. This is a bay scallop, someone's asking. Kimberly wants to know. So these are bay scallops. A little bit different than the sea scallops. And when they first emerge out and they settle down, in that first 8 days, that's when you could lose up to 50% of the population. So 50% of the babies aren't going to make it past 8 days. That tells you how many things like to eat scallops. Now, I mentioned before, scallops are not really found in Long Island Sound, not very many of them anyway. They're starting to move up into the Sound a little bit, so we do find them, but in the past, they weren't really here at all. Scallops need good temperatures, okay? So for their babies to survive, it needs to be, they don't even reproduce until it's between 59 and 86. So if it gets warmer than 86 or lower than 59, the babies are not going to survive. Also, salinity is really important. And we did a program about that. If the salinity is below 24 or above 30, then they're not going to survive. So you've got this temperature range and a salinity range. And if the temperature goes above or below either one of those, the embryos, the babies, are not even going to survive. They're not even going to emerge out. So someone's asking how big they can get. 3 inches will be the biggest. So the biggest one I have to look at, one of these two. So they're not big. But I did mention the biggest ones in the world get 10 inches. So you can find some big scallops in some places. Now, let's look at, here we go. So they are filter feeders. They are filtering out plankton. And the way they're doing that is they're filtering it out with their gills. As they take water in, their gills collect the plankton that's in the water, and then they squirt the water back out. That's also how they move. They squirt water. So most of the bivalves, and remember bivalves are 2-shelled animals, so an animal with 2 shells. Most bivalves have a foot that they stick out and they use it to move around. It's kind of like just a muscle. It's soft and squishy like our tongue, and they use that to move around. The scallops will use water propulsion. So they squirt water out of their front of them and move really quickly. So they will go in this direction here. So it's kind of backwards. And they squirt that water, so they jet themselves around underwater. Really cool. Very different from any other of the bivalves. So in the past, we've talked about adaptation. Bivalves need to have different ways of moving around. Although most of them use a foot, there are a few that use different methods. And this is one of them. They use jet propulsion. And the mussel uses byssal threads to move. All right, let's take a look at another one. I don't know which ones I've showed you here. Oh, this one's really neat. Look at the stripes on that one. Now, I said they only live 2 years max. So with some of the bivalves, you can count these growth rings. Sometimes you can tell the difference between the first and second year. But like many animals, they may grow for part of the year, stop, and then grow again, and then stop. So they may get growth rings, multiple growth rings in 1 year. So not a good age determination. But let's look at some that this is 1 year's growth. So that is a year-old scallop. Okay, here's another one. And if you compare that to a big one, now it could get bigger than this in a year, but you can imagine about half the size in the first year and then the rest in the second year. And again, a lot of them aren't going to make it past a year and a half. So they really only have a half a year to reproduce because they can't have babies until they're about a year old. So these small ones can't even have babies. So someone's asking where they're found. Great question. Typically, they're going to be found from New Jersey down to Florida. So we are getting them up into Long Island Sound. They're really popular in Chesapeake Bay. These are harvested. So the way they harvest them, they have a trawl that pulls behind a power boat, and it scrapes them off the bottom. That's typically where they live. You can also go out and hand rake them in shallows or collect them by hand, just picking them up. So that's different ways that people use to collect them. In 1981, I looked this up, it was pretty cool. 1981, $2.4 million of scallops were collected and sold. So it's a pretty good amount for a fishing industry. You get quite a good amount of money for these. Let's mention, pick another shell here. They have eyes. They could have 30 to 40 eyes. And their eyes are in a row all along. So each one of these little corrugated lumps, you can get a little eye in there. So they will have a whole bunch of eyes. And those eyes are similar to ours. They have retinas and lenses. And they can see mostly movement. They don't have the detail that we have, but they can see movement with all those eyes. And then they use their jet propulsion to get away if something's trying to eat them. So I mentioned babies, everything likes to eat them. One of the reasons for the decline in the scallop, this is back to our food chain, is the reduction of sharks. People are hunting sharks more often. We're taking more sharks out of the environment. Sharks do not eat bay scallops. Sharks eat rays. And rays and skates are related to sharks, but that's what likes to eat scallops. So the rays and the sharks, they come along, the rays and the skates will come along and eat lots of the scallops. If you take the sharks away, you get more rays and skates and less scallops. So one of the reasons for their decline. The other reason is that we've developed our coast a lot. So every time we put houses or roads or buildings or parking lots near the ocean, the runoff from that puts toxins into the water, and that can affect the scallops or affect their food. So their food could be reduced or they could be affected themselves by taking in toxins. These are another one of our indicator species. They can indicate how healthy the water is by taking toxins into them, and they're going to be affected first because they're absorbing the toxins right into their gills. Remember, they use their gills to collect their food. Someone has a question here. What is the name of this book about scallops? It talks about the eyes. I don't know that book, but that would be really cool. Maybe everybody should try and look up and find a really interesting book and learn about the scallop. Maybe you could find something in their eyes, about their eyes. Are they microscopic? So the plankton is a microscopic organism, either phytoplankton, which will be plants, or zooplankton, which are animals. They also will collect out organic matter that will get caught in their gills, and they can digest some of that. So remember, organic matter. If you go to the website, all of our past videos have vocabulary words, and we did talk about organic matter. That's something that was alive, that's in the water. Okay, so they're in decline. Another reason that they might be in decline, take a look at the inside of that shell. Look at the pretty colors in there. Another reason for possible decline is the temperature changes. So remember, they need that specific temperature, 59 to 86. If it's warmer than that, the babies can't survive. If it's colder than that, the babies can't survive. Long Island Sound is getting warmer. They're from down south, so it's fine. They can live during those different temperatures, but they can't have babies during those different temperatures. So as Long Island Sound gets warmer, it reduces the amount of time that they can have babies. So if it gets too hot in the Sound in the middle of the summer, they're not going to be able to have any babies. But then in the spring and the fall, they can have babies. Now, we've mentioned that the skates and rays like to eat them. There are other things that like to eat them. One of the things are oyster drills or moon snails. They both have a rasping drill mouth part, and they will drill a hole into the scallop. Let me get out of there so it focuses on that. They'll drill a hole right into the scallop, and that's how they will stick they'll digest the scallop right inside of its shell. So isn't that cool? I actually have two of them that have been drilled by an oyster drill. It's not really focusing on that, is it? How close can I get? All right, you guys have to tell me when it's in focus. Skippy the Scallop by Tate. All right, very good. Maybe we should look up and see what Skippy the Scallop is all about. So their decline has been pretty consistent. Since about 1950, their populations have been dropping. So, and I mentioned many of the reasons that their population is dropping. But a food chain does have a lot to do with it. And I am going to be doing a food chain program. I think that's on the calendar for tomorrow afternoon at 11 o'clock. We'll just talk about food chains. But when you take away a top predator like a shark, the number of lower predators like rays will increase, and then the food for those rays will decrease. So that's one of the reasons why the scallop population is dropping down. You can make necklaces. Yeah, these are already pre-drilled. You can make a nice little necklace out of that. I have seen people, you can drill these. The shell of a scallop is thinner than clam shells, a little bit harder to drill, but you can drill them and make necklaces out of them or other types of jewelry. Someone says, yes, I am in the water room. You can look. I don't know if you can see it. In this tank back here is an animal that's coming up. I think we're doing this one next week. It's called an oyster toadfish. I can't wait to do that one. If you saw the Stargazer program, which was absolutely fascinating to me, I like oyster toadfish even better than stargazers. Not because they're electric or venomous like the Stargazer, but oyster toadfish are just lots of fun. Let's try that. Somebody says if I put my hand behind it, let's see if that works. Is it focusing on there a little better? All right. But I think that's really cool. You got that hole right through there. All right, let's see what other questions. If anybody has any questions, were they ever used by trade, for trade by Native Americans? So as a food, the Native Americans did eat them, and I'm sure that they had a way to dry them or preserve them so they could trade them that way. I don't know if this is one of the ones that would have been made into beads. It has a pretty thin shell, but I can definitely imagine it being used as a decoration. So to make jewelry out of it, I'm sure, with all the colors, the amazing colors that they had. Now remember, these are not found along the New England coast, or they weren't back then. So they would have had to trade these from further south. And I'm sure with the way the Native Americans traded, that this would have been something that would have been pretty cool up here because we don't have them, so they would trade for them. All right. Quahog shells were used. The quahogs were used for wampum, and those were the beads, but other shells could be used to make jewelry. So wampum were specifically the beads made by the Native Americans. And I think that we might reach out to our local tribes, maybe the Mohegans or the Mashantucket, and see if they have a video or could do a demonstration on how to make wampum. I'm absolutely fascinated how they could make, if you've ever seen it, the beads are absolutely beautiful, and to turn a shell like a clamshell into that has always fascinated me. So I would love to do a more in-depth program on the making of wampum and how they used it, because they used lots of different ways that the wampum was used. All right. So I think I covered everything that I have, unless somebody wants to see a speckled one. I think the most speckled one I have is probably that one. Okay, and let's see if we can find a striped one. Okay, so striped, speckled, and then some of them are pretty solid colored. So that one has a little bit of striping. This is actually a pretty common color, and this gray could be because it's of the mud that it's living in, the soft bottom where they are. Sometimes that mud can stain the shells. So sometimes we find quahogs with the outer shell is stained like that as well. But yeah, there's a good example of a speckled versus a striped one. Okay, I want to remind everybody that these programs happen Tuesdays through Fridays at 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock. You can see the past programs on our YouTube channel. Meg's Point Nature Center has our own YouTube channel. And you can see them on our website, the Virtual Learning Center at megspointnaturecenter.org. And with the Virtual Learning Center, we have lots of content other than the videos. So we've got some vocabulary lists with each video and some word searches, word scrambles, different games and activities that you can play. Plymouth Plantation has, oh, that's very cool. We should look into that. All right. I hope everybody is enjoying these programs. And again, I'm going to continue the programs as long as I can. Starting to run out of some live animals in the building, but again, we can talk about shells. We can talk about animals that are in the park. The programs that we do here at the Nature Center are all related to things that are found in Connecticut. So if you're outside of Connecticut, you might learn about animals that are here, but a lot of our animals are found in the Mid-Atlantic and New England states, so they apply all over the place. So thank you for watching, and again, tune in at 2 o'clock, and I'll have another program for you at that time.